Good morning, class, and welcome to today's animal theme day or bring your pet day. I don't have a pet, so I turned myself into a pet. Luckily, I just watched The Tiger King, so I became a tiger, and I still have some wizarding powers that you guys gave me a few years back. And check it out, I can actually wiggle my ears now. Or pretty cool, huh? But anywho, I do want to say that the pajama winners, it was everybody. You guys all deserve a prize, and we did have some late entries, so I do want to share with you those late entries, and I will go ahead and show you guys the entries for the Christmas photos. So here are some of the late entries from yesterday's pajama day. So some of the late submissions was Wendy taking her selfie in her pajamas. We also had Destiny, who submitted a photo of her in her pajamas. And last but not least, we had the one and only Lil C's. So thank you guys for submitting your pajama photos. So for all you pajama contestants, I will give you guys a prize as soon as we get back to school. If we don't get back to school, then I will have to give you guys a prize some way, somehow. But thank you guys for submitting. And now let's move on to our Christmas submissions. First up, we have Carolyn. Love the spirit and thank you for the inspiration on making my own Santa photo. We have Alina showing off her Mickey Mouse gingerbread ears with the Christmas lights in the background. We have Yvette, that's actually very creative, the next fashion designer. She actually did not have any Christmas stuff, but she did have a blanket, which she made into a nice little hoodie. Next we have Emily, the nice light necklace and her Christmas spirit. We have Juan with the awesome T-Rex Christmas shirt and, of course, the Raiders hat. And last but not least, we have Jesus, who is dogging the camera looking like a gangster, straight up G on Christmas. Great job, Jesus. So once again, thank you guys all for submitting your photos. I love the school spirit. Keep it up, and you guys are only 3 days away from getting a homework pass. And if you guys do it all week long, I might even throw in an extra surprise. So keep it up. And the last announcement for today is you guys have no homework. Alrighty, so yesterday we talked about how the Italian Renaissance started to change the way people were thinking. Right now I know you guys are all looking up my nose, but let's focus, okay? So today, what we're doing is yesterday we talked about the Italian Renaissance and how it changed the way people were thinking. They started to think this new way, and this new way of thinking was called humanism. And the humanism was, they started to break away from the church. They started to realize that we do a lot of things for God, and we know we want to stay focused on the church, but we can also become our own people. We are also individuals. And when we start to study different subjects such as history, art, literature, science, and medicine, we start to have these own ideas. And these new ideas start to lead us to thinking a different way. So we're still very religious, but at the same time, we're going to start to be individuals. So this is when people started to found new interests, and they started to realize that we can go ahead and use our talents, and people could acknowledge us, and people are going to like us for our arts, for our buildings, and stuff like that. And one thing that was really cool about this new perspective and new way of thinking was they revitalized the Greek culture and the Roman art and literature. And when they rediscovered this, they were super excited and they found love with the Greek and Roman culture. So before we move on, let's go ahead and review the questions for today. Alright, so number one, what sources inspired Renaissance artists and scholars? The sources that inspired the Renaissance artists and scholars were the ancient Greek and Roman writings, the Roman ruins, and also the statues and the architecture in Greece and in Rome. Number two, why was the word human contained in the term humanism? The word human is contained in the word humanism because they focused on humans. They focused on everybody being individual and being their own person at that time. Number three, what are some basic ideas of humanism? Some of the basic ideas of humanism are they emphasize the actions and the abilities of humans as individuals, and people are becoming famous and are getting acknowledgement from their accomplishments with art, literature, and things of that nature. So today what we're going to talk about is we are going to talk about the different Italian writers and the artists that came up from this new Italian Renaissance. Some of you guys are very familiar with them, such as Leonardo da Vinci, and even the Ninja Turtles, Michelangelo. Today we're going to talk about them. All the Ninja Turtles are actually named after famous Italian Renaissance artists. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump into that today. And today we're going to talk about how the Italian Renaissance, or the objective for today, is we're going to figure out and describe how the Italian writers and artists were influenced by the Italian Renaissance. So let's get to it. So when we started to talk about this, there was this new term, and it was called the Renaissance man. And a Renaissance man, just look at the image to the right, and you can see it's like a jack, and it has all these different things. There's movie film, there's scissors, there's a computer, there's tools, there's a camera, there's a guitar, there's a pen, everything. So what we call a Renaissance man is what we call it, and this is what we call like a jack of all trades. That's like another term for it. So what it is, it describes a male or female who is very intelligent and has skills and knowledge in a lot of different things. So people that are good at everything, those people are considered like the jack of all trades because they can do everything. Or back then they were called Renaissance man or Renaissance men because they can do a little bit of everything. They knew a lot of things, and they were just well educated with stuff like that. So that's what a Renaissance man was. Many Italian writers, they contributed with great works of literature to the Renaissance. The earliest was this politician and a poet. His name was Dante. And Dante, before him, most medieval authors had written in Latin, the language of the church. So they were very just using the language of the church. But Dante, he wrote in Italian, which was the very common language of the people, and it was the language that everyone spoke. And by using Italian, he was the first person to do that, and he showed that the people's language was just as good as Latin. So people that didn't understand Latin and only understood Italian, they felt a little special because they realized like, oh cool, our language is good enough to be written in. Later, a lot of people started to use this Italian language as they wrote, which was kind of cool. So some of Dante's major works was called the Divine Comedy, and it describes this imaginary journey he took through the afterlife. And on his journey, Dante meets people from his past as well as great figures from history. In fact, the Roman poet Virgil, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is one of the guides on the journey. And of course, in his writing, Dante described all these problems that he saw in Italian society. Okay? Later on, another Italian writer came up, and he was also a politician, and his name was Niccolo Machiavelli. And in 1513, Machiavelli wrote this short book, and it was called The Prince. And it gave leaders advice on how they should rule. So Dante talked about the Italian society, and Machiavelli talked about how people should rule or how people should also behave. So Machiavelli, he didn't care about the theories of what should work. In his writing, he argued that the rulers had to focus on here and now. So kind of like what I always tell you guys, to be present and mindful about what's going on. That's what Machiavelli said. He was not only interested in what happened in both war and in times of peace. Machiavelli thought that sometimes rulers had to be ruthless in order to keep order. So they needed to be strict and they needed to hold their own ground. In this way, Machiavelli serves a good example of the Renaissance interest in both human behavior and in society. So both of these writers took it to another level. They wrote in Italian, and they talked about Italian society, and a lot of them talked about how, and then Machiavelli talked about how people should behave and how society should be ran. So before we start talking about this slide, I want you to just look at the picture on the right, and you can actually see the difference in how the art is going to change. So medieval art was very plain, kind of looked like just blocky. And then in Renaissance, they started to make things a little bit more realistic, and that's how things started to change because they started to give value to the humans. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So during the Renaissance, Italian artists created some of the most beautiful paintings and sculptures in the world, and you guys are very familiar with a lot of them, such as like the Last Supper, part of the Mona Lisa, Salvador Dali's work, all these different Renaissance art. You can see like these portraits of these people, and this is how they became some of the most beautiful and sculptures in the world. The rich families in the church, they all hired these artists to create these works, and these new techniques were used to make the art come alive, and they wanted to make it seem more realistic because they wanted to give value to the humans. So Renaissance ideas about the value of human life are reflected in the art and at the time. So artists tried to show how people were more realistic than the medieval artists had done. um, Renaissance artists studied the human body and drew what they saw. However, because artists often use classical statues as their guides, many of the human beings look like they're drawn as perfect as Greek gods. So they wanted to really put emphasis on the way people were drawn. Artists also use this new discovery called perspective. And perspective is a method of showing a three-dimensional scene on a flat surface so it looks real. So if you look at the medieval art, it just looks flat. And in Renaissance art, they wanted to make it look like have a perspective. So make it seem realistic and make it look more 3D. Mostly like the art that you can see nowadays has perspective in it. So you can see what's in the background, you know what's in the front, you know what's on the sides, and you can kind of see the picture kind of pops out in 3D. Perspectives, they use these various techniques. For example, people in the background were smaller, and then those in the front. Also, the lines, such as the floor tiles, appear diagonal. Colors should show the distance. Mountains in the background of the picture were hazy. So depending on how it was, that's how they created perspective. Small things in the back, less detail. Things up front had more detail. So just like the art that you guys know right now. And like I said before, most of this art reflected the value of being a human, and they wanted to bring more realistic ideas to this. Another thing that they did in the Renaissance is they wanted to give people, well, the way they drew them, they wanted to give them personality. So if you look at the medieval art, no personality, but if you look at the Renaissance art, it looks like the baby is there and it looks like the mom is happy. So they wanted to give people personality, so it became more real as well. Out of all the Italian Renaissance artists, two of them stand above the rest, and two of them were the two masters. These were like the main people that you guys know of as well. Each is what we call a Renaissance person. Someone who can do anything well. So these were like the definition of a Renaissance man because they had a lot of different talents and they had a lot of different skills. One of the greatest Italian artists, also known as one of the Ninja Turtles, his name was Michelangelo. And he had many talents. Michelangelo, he designed buildings, he wrote poetry, he carved sculptures, he painted magnificent pictures. Perhaps one of his most famous works are the painting of the covers of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. So if you can see that on the left. And he built this, and this is on top of this huge chapel in Rome, and it's really beautiful, and that's what he did. And it's cool because they haven't touched it up or anything, so all the stuff that he has is original, and they always make sure that it's still in pristine conditions. The muscular human figures in this immense painting remind the viewer of the Greek and Roman statues. So a lot of this showed the greatness of the people, the color, and it just showed people being realistic. So Michelangelo, like I said, is named after a Ninja Turtles are named after him, and he was a Renaissance man because he can do all these different things: designing buildings, wrote poetry, carved sculptures, and painted beautiful pictures. The sculpture on the right, that's the sculpture of David. I can't show you the bottom half because you know why, and that's one of the most famous sculptures that he did, and he resembled that after a Greek statue. But the one you guys all know, one of the true geniuses of the Renaissance, was Leonardo da Vinci. In fact, some have called him the greatest genius there has ever lived. In addition to being an expert painter, Leonardo was a sculptor, he was an architect, he was an inventor, he was an engineer, and he also even planned out the city, and he was a map maker. Since he was good with nature and in technology, this fascinated Leonardo. So detailed in his drawings of plants, animals, and machines filled his sketchbook. So he was drawing a lot of realistic looking things. And what his main goal was to make his art look more real. So he wanted to make it look real. And that's what he was all about. So Leonardo, he studied the anatomy or the structure of human bodies. He dissected corpses, dissected animals, and he wanted to see how the bones and the muscles looked when they were dissected, so when he drew them, he can make them look more realistic. Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, they also show a lot of human emotions. For example, when you see the Mona Lisa, you can't help but wonder, like, why is she smiling? What is she looking at? What is she doing? She has a personality. She looks happy. Nobody knows why she is smiling, and that's one of the greatest mysteries of Da Vinci, or of the Mona Lisa, because Da Vinci painted this so realistic and gave her some personality. And this is probably one of the most famous paintings that he has done. But now let's go ahead and look at some of the other things that he's done as well. So Da Vinci is also known for painting the Last Supper. As you can see right there, you guys have all seen it. I have that little statue in my classroom. I wish we were in there so we can see it. But that's part of the Da Vinci. And also, like I was telling you, that's like his sketchbook. That's an actual picture from his sketchbook. He was obsessed with human anatomy because he wanted to see how realistic he can get, and he wanted to show perspective, and he wanted to make his paintings look more realistic than just a blob of paint on the canvas or on his sketchbook. So that's what Da Vinci is known for. So as a quick review, the influence of the Italian Renaissance, they came up with this term called the Renaissance man. And the Renaissance man is somebody, a man or a woman, that has a lot of different skills and is talented in a lot of different things. And that's what a Renaissance man. Nowadays, we call it like a jack of all trades, somebody that can do a lot and is good at everything. Some of the famous artists or the writers during this Italian Renaissance was Dante and Machiavelli. And one thing that they were known for was they were the first writers to write in Italian. And this was kind of cool because before everyone was writing in Latin, and when they started to write in Italian, it gave the Italians a little bit more pride in their own language and said, okay, cool, we're worth it now. Our language is valued, and our language is part of this history. And remember, they wrote about political issues, they wrote about how people can become better, how the society can improve, and that's what the writers did. For the artists at this time, they had a bunch of different methods, and what they did, the artists, is they wanted to paint these beautiful artworks and make these sculptures, but they didn't want to do it like it was before in the medieval times where it's just bland. They wanted to give it perspective, and perspective was a way of showing it a 3D painting or 3D art surface, so it made it look real. And the way they did this was they made things in the back smaller, maybe blurrier. They had things up front that looked closer, had more details, so you can really see the 3D effects on the paintings. They also wanted to show personality in their artworks. Some of the two most famous artists that you guys know of are Michelangelo. And Michelangelo, he was known for painting the Sistine Chapel, the artwork up top. And he was a Renaissance man because he was good at building. He wrote poetry, he did sculptures, and he was great at drawing. The next one that you guys all know of is Leonardo da Vinci. And Da Vinci, he was a genius. He was a sculptor, a painter, architect, an inventor, an engineer. And he was obsessed with the human anatomy and human body, and he wanted to make sure that everything looked realistic. And he also used the thing of perspective, and he gave people personality when he drew his stuff, just like the Mona Lisa. So for homework, I want you to answer these questions. Number 1, what does it mean if someone is called a Renaissance man or woman? Number 2, what techniques are used for showing perspective? And number 3, which artist would you have wanted to meet during the Renaissance and why? So be sure to explain why. If you want and go above and beyond, you can actually look up your own Renaissance artists and tell me a little bit about them. I'm thinking about having you guys do that anyway. But yeah, you guys can start that now if you like. Alright, so that concludes our lesson for today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments or anything like that. And I'm looking forward to you guys sending me the photos of you guys in sports attire, because today is sports day. So if you did not know, today was animal day. I don't have any pets, but I am an animal today. Tomorrow, please make sure you bring your sports jerseys, and we'll see what's going on, because we need some more school spirit. Here we go. I'll see you guys all tomorrow.